Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Following a stint at St. Olaf's College in Minnesota, Eugene England sought employment at BYU. He also was one of the founders of a magazine called Dialogue. It's a Mormon history magazine that's been going since the 60s. Did it cause problems for his employment at BYU? Dr. Terryl Givens is the biographer of Stretching the Heavens, the life of Eugene England. So, yeah, it did, in short. So, Dr. Terryl Givens is going to tell us more about that in our next conversation. Check it out.
So he applied for all kinds of positions, all kinds of jobs, everywhere. He was desperate. He had a wife. He had several children by this point. And he found two positions. One, he found part-time employment with the church educational system, teaching institute back here in Utah. And then he also secured a position at the church historical department. Leonard Arrington felt a great friendship and affinity for him, an appreciation of his scholarship and potential. And so he was hired as a researcher part-time in the church history department during those kind of Camelot years, right, early 1970s. And most of his work there was with Mormon journals and diaries, and specifically on biographical materials for Brigham Young.
And I'm trying to remember, Dialogue started, was that in the 60s?
That was the late 60s.
So he was part of that too, which kind of got him into trouble later.
Well, certainly. That's the recurrent, what do I want to say, kind of
theme of his life?
Theme of his life was his affiliation with Dialogue.
Now, didn't Elder Oaks help start Dialogue as well?
I don't know if he helped start it, but he was one of the early, and I should know this, but I can't remember, contributor or one of the editorial board, certainly supportive.
Right.
And there was just widespread enthusiasm for the project. This period of the mid to late 1960s was a kind of period of intellectual ferment in the church. There was a great deal of discussion about where can we find a forum for the exploration of Latter-day Saint intellectuals and scholars, their ideas, that isn't constrained by orthodoxy or by what would become church correlation. And so he was one of the two or three primary founders of the Dialogue.
Elder Oaks?
No,
Eugene England. Okay.
Was it Wes Anderson? Who was the other? I've forgotten some of the other names. And so they launched that to great fanfare. There were national press gave them attention and write-ups.
Was that a good or a bad thing?
Well, it ended up being a bad thing because the person that they interviewed, one of the other editors, made it sound like this is going to be an avant-garde, leftist, activist kind of journal. And he used language in the interview that was published in national media that immediately created an impression that alarmed some of the brethren. And so almost from day one, they were working to overcome an impression that they were activist, agitators, left-leaning. Excuse me. And Gene, he labored diligently and really energetically to try to steer a middle path where people were free to express themselves on both sides of the theological and political divide. But that's proved a recurrent difficulty in Latter-day Saint culture to steer a middle moderate kind of path. You can look at the history of almost every independent journal that's come up, or every independent organization, of intellectuals, and they immediately tend to veer far right or far left. And so it was made known to him very directly and explicitly that his affiliation with Dialogue was a problem, an impediment to his hiring at BYU. And so he did not secure a position here until he had divested himself of his role as an editor, although he continued to contribute over the years. And that would have been about 1975, I think, is when he first started teaching here.
So he was teaching at the with the institute.
Teaching the institute part-time.
Part-time, was that at the University of Utah?
I don't believe it was. I don't remember where that appointment was.
But then he was still in Salt Lake with the church history department.
That's right.
Leonard Arrington.
That's right, and he never got a full-time position there, so it was half-time at both places, essentially.
Okay, and so he really wanted to get on at BYU. And tell us, it's funny because there are names in there of people that I know, like Bob Rees, and I'm trying to remember a few other names in there. I was like, oh, these are still living people that I know.
Yeah. There are a lot of people who were witnesses to many of these unfolding dramas.
Yeah.
But he applied his first time he was turned down. He was not shy about approaching the brethren and asking them for clarification or to fill in blanks in his understanding of what was transpiring. He spent quite a few afternoons just up there at the church administration building, seeing who was in their office and who he could speak to. And it was generally Elder Packer that he interacted with the most in regards to his pursuit of a BYU position. And Elder Packer made it pretty clearly known to him early on that it was his affiliation with Dialogue. Gene would later complain to Elder Packer that, well, you didn't tell me that I had to quit. And Elder Packer would say, well, I think the implication was pretty clear. Gene would say, well, I'm not very good at reading signs. You have to be direct with me. And so when it was made clear, then he did resign. And so a year later, he was hired. And so he became a full-time employee of BYU. I think it was 75.
And that was in the English department?
When he started. Yes, in the English department. And that ended up being kind of a perfect storm of wrong circumstances and timing for Gene England to become a professor at BYU, because in the 1970s, moving into the 80s, that was kind of the high point of revolution in American English departments. I think it was Henry Kissinger who said, at least it's attributed to him, that the fights, the civil wars in American English departments are the most vicious ever seen because the stakes are so low. And that's an accurate description of my own experience coming of age as an academic in the late 1980s, actually in my case, where there's all kinds of new isms. There's feminism, and there's post-structuralism and deconstruction and structuralism and semiotics and reader response criticism. And in other words, the list goes on and on and on. And there were very important political stakes associated with all of these diverse groups. And at BYU, at this moment, a decision had been made to try to bring more women onto the faculty. And of course, most women trained in higher education in the 1970s would be feminist in orientation. And of course, many in the church saw that as inconsistent with good standing.
This is going to lead to an Elder Packer talk, I can tell.
That's right, it does. And of course, we all know that feminism becomes one of the kind of comes to be singled out as one of the threats to the church, right? And even though institutionally BYU had made the decision to move forward with hiring more women and at least tacitly allowing feminist theories of literary criticism interpretation to be a part of that English department. And Gene England is a very strong champion of those tendencies and directions, but there was great resistance within the department and outside the department, and a couple of high-profile dismissals from BYU of outspoken feminists. Other issues involved as well, right? Abortion in one prominent case, pro-choice views. And so this all added to Gene England's tendency to be a kind of provocateur, right? Meant that his years at BYU were almost always involved in controversy and tempestuous conflict.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about those feminists? Because they didn't make tenure either. What were the issues involved there?
Well, the most prominent case was Cecilia Farr, and she gave a speech, I believe it was on the state capitol in Utah, in which she insisted that one could be pro-choice advocate of abortion rights and a faithful member of the church.
Which Harry Reid was,
but he was not a BYU professor. And she was given to know that that was not the sentiment of BYU administrators and or the brethren. It's always hard to know exactly who is making the judgment calls. But
They like it that way, don't they?
well, there's a certain principle of deniability maybe that may be relevant here. But so she was denied tenure, and all indications are that that was the principal reason. Her scholarship seemed to be first rate, her teaching evaluation seemed to be first rate, and so she had a lot of sympathy from the national media and from a few powerful voices within the department, including Jane England. But she lost her case, and I think that left lasting fissures in the English department that they persisted for years.
Are they still there?
I don't think so, but I don't have enough affiliation in the English department.
You're not in the English department
no,
anymore.
No.
You don't deal with them anymore, I guess.
No.
But you do teach here occasionally, don't you?
I have been teaching a course once a year here at BYU through the humanities department, and it's a course on belief and doubt in life and literature. And so it's an opportunity to kind of examine the history of unbelief in the modern age, and to engage seriously tough questions about God and faith, and our faith in particular. So I've had a really good time teaching that to outstanding students for a couple of years now.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Terryl Givens. By the way, I'm giving away a free book called The God Who Weeps, and it's autographed by Terryl Givens. So if you'd like to get in and win this book, sign up to gospeltangents.com/Terryl, Terryl, and you could win this autographed copy. But in our next conversation, I'm going to ask Terryl if it's okay to ask hard questions at church.
I think it is now. I think it is. I have had experience working as a consultant with the church history department on a number of projects, and the very direct and explicit instructions and feedback that I was party to with the brethren was unambiguously be honest, get it all out, and there isn't any topic which we are not comfortable addressing.
Thanks for listening to Gospel Tangents. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe at patreon.com/gospeltangents. You can hear the entire interviews there. Also, check out our new, improved, user-friendly website at gospeltangents.com. We've made it much more user-friendly, so check that out. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got more of our great videos. Thanks again.